Geopolitics, tariffs, and a surprise in U.S. crop ratings. But what does it all mean for grains and oilseeds? Are the markets reacting rationally, or are the specs still in control? I'm Johanna Bota, and here to break down the key drivers is StoneX's VP of Clearing and Execution Sales, Bertrand Oesterle. Welcome, Bertrand. Let's start with all the global tensions that have been dominating the headlines. How have grains and oilseeds responded?
So we've had quite a few elements this week, and I'm going to try to take them more or less chronologically. First of all, we had the US budget bill that came in, and the Republicans were trying to get Trump to go even further into spending cuts. So it was doubtful that it would pass initially, so the dollar fell. As the dollar fell, the euro dollar went up, and that put some pressure on Euronext commodities, in particular Paris wheat. So that was the first element. Then we saw the lower house agreeing this budget and passing it through. So we had a reversal on the euro dollar, but at the same time we had Trump coming in with a 50% tariff on Europe. That was very quickly put on hold until the 9th of July, and that created more uncertainty. And as we've seen previously with tariffs, it put pressure overall. So we had two elements of pressure, one after the other. And then you've probably seen overnight, the federal court came to bother Trump by saying your tariffs are illegal. And so Trump is appealing. So again, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty is probably going to mean risk-off attitude for many, and that could put some pressure again. Now, there's been one other geopolitical element that we've spoken about for the past few months, if not years. It's again a worsening of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. We basically see Russia bombarding Ukraine more intensively. There's a report stating that there's 50,000 Russian troops at the border of the northeastern Ukrainian part. So if it worsens again, what does it entail for the ports? So Odessa in Ukraine, Novosibirsk in Russia. If those two ports get hit, it could impact the exports, and it could have a bullish headline. It's not the case just yet, but we are in a situation where Trump is calling Putin crazy, saying that he doesn't want to put extra tariffs or extra sanctions onto Russia because he wants a deal. So is it muscle flexing before everyone gets to the table, or is it simply a worsening? So we'll have to monitor any potential impact on real logistics if those two main ports of Odessa and Novosibirsk do get some war issues.
What about wheat? Because last week we were talking about wheat finally having a bounce, but that was short-lived. What happened?
It was indeed very short-lived. So last week I told you that the bulls were very encouraged by the situation in China, and that our bears were saying, bring it on, we'll sell the rally. And that's what happened. They sold the rally. So if we look at the Chinese situation, we've got a bit more information. There has been some beneficial rain. So the northern Chinese plains that were 25% in drought are now 15% in drought. But we have had some information from China stating that the areas that have been affected could lose anything from 10 to 30% in yield. And when people try to put that in terms of million tons estimates, we have a very wide range of 3.5 to 10 million tons. So to be fair to the bulls, that 3.5 to 10 million tons all depends on where you start your output estimate from. The USDA has got 140 to 142. People have got in mind 130 to 135. Do you start with minus 3.5 or minus 10 from 140 or from 130? So that was the bullish element that caused the spike, and people will see on the chart that we'll present on the screen, that little spike that took us out, for example, in Paris wheat, out of the downward channel, and then we've come back straight back into that downward channel. So why did we do so? Because the Chinese have also told us that the Henan province is harvesting. Mm-hmm. The wheat harvest is about 15% completed, and the argument from the bears was to say, if China is harvesting, that means that the wheat thinning stage was almost over, therefore that heat may not have had the same impact.
Got it.
And when we go beyond China, we have had some beneficial rains in problematic areas previously. So for example, northern Germany has received some rain. The northern part of Europe has received some rain. Mm-hmm. And when we look at Germany, we still see northern Germany with a 30% deficit in moisture compared to normal. And the German cooperatives have been a bit cautious this week by telling us that instead of 21.4 million tons of output, it may only be 21, but it's still better than last year by some 14%.
Okay.
And when we look at other areas, the US have received some beneficial rains, and so have Ukraine and Russia. And beyond this, Russia made a little bit of a surprise on the recommendation price, exactly. So in the past, Russia had stated you can't sell wheat for exports under $250 per ton FOB. They've removed that lower price for May and August. It doesn't mean an awful lot in terms of end of the season as such, but the bears have looked at it as there's 3.8 million tons potentially of stocks that could come to the export market. And more importantly, if Russia is taking that price away, that minimum price away, it means that they're not concerned about new crop. And so the bears have come once again to say, we think that there is a big Russian crop coming because we think that despite the frost issues, there's good spring planting, and that spring condition is good. Therefore, we might have 85 to 90 million tons of production, which obviously the bulls are contesting by saying they think it's only 79 to 83.
Yeah.
So when we look at Paris, with all the geopoliticals plus what I've just described, the bears have had the upper end. And by looking at the specs have on that spike reduced by about 27,000 lots, which interestingly is something we can find again in the open interest, especially in September. So that is a very interesting point for us because we see that it is very recent shorts that have gone out.
Yeah.
And they've gone out of September. They haven't gone out of December or March. On the contrary, December has in OI remained very stable, and March open interest has actually gone up. So when we look at the SEPDEX spread, we see that the SEPDEX spread hasn't moved. It's still in the -12, -11 area. And it means the roll hasn't started, and it's way too early for that roll to take place. And there's a big argument between the bulls and the bears about from which point that roll is going to take place. Some on the bull side think that's around -15 and below, it makes sense to carry that wheat forward from a physical point of view. And the bears are saying, because there's a lack of demand, because France is finding it difficult to sell to its normal export markets, that's market in September, which is around 201, 202 currently, could go way lower, with the most pessimistics going to 180. So that puts a lot of context for the spread, where people on the bear side say it could go all the way down to -30. So the big question mark on that SEPDEX is going to be, where do we see the spec roll from, and where does it take us from to? So is it going to go from -30 to back to -15, or from -15 to 0? And that's going to be something to watch for the next few months.
But hold on, Bertrand. What you just mentioned is mostly bearish, but how about the U.S. crop conditions from last Tuesday, which appeared to be a shocker, but is this not bullish territory then?
So the figure that you're referring to is the USDA estimate for the first good to excellent ratings that we've seen from the USDA on spring wheat in the US. And yes, pre-report, the analysts were hoping to see a 71% good to excellent rating.
Yep.
That was on the back of the spring wheat planting going very fast. It's 87 planted already with good conditions, recent rains, and it came out at 45%. So we had an estimate of pre-report 71%, it comes in at 45%. The first reaction is to look at those two figures and say, oh wow, those spring conditions are so bad compared to estimates, it's got to be bullish. But what we've noticed is that the 45% good to excellent from the USDA is actually not far away from the 43% 5-year average. So therefore, the market did not react to the bull side. Why? Because the understanding was that the 71% from the analyst pre-report was simply an overshot of estimates.
Yeah.
And when we look at winter wheat came in at 50% good to excellent in terms of rating. That was below estimates against a 53%, but it's still ahead of the 5-year average of 48%. Yeah. So in that sense, yes, that 71% against 45% was the shocker element, but it was due to an overshoot of estimates rather than a comparison to the 5-year average. And the bears looked at it as it's not an issue. It's just a blip in estimates. And to try to be fair to the bulls, there's still something to watch out for in spring wheat. About 29% of the area is still in drought. And so those good to excellent ratings will need to be monitored over the next few weeks.
So if the interpretation of the wheat good to excellent ratings wasn't very clear, is this going to be the same case for U.S. corn and U.S. soybean?
It was a bit more stable in corn and soybean. So if we look at corn, the crop is again being planted at a very fast pace in the US. It's 87% planted. In terms of ratings, we got the first rating this week. It's 68% good to excellent. So yes, it came to the slightly disappointing side because it was below estimates of 73%. But when we compare to the 5-year average, it's below 72. So we are 4% lower. So that will need to be monitored over the next few weeks, but it's not that far away as it was for wheat. Right. And when we come to soybean, we don't have yet crop ratings because soybean is planted a bit later. So those crop ratings will come in the next few weeks. And in terms of planting, we're 76% planted in the US so far, which is ahead of the 5-year average of 68%.
And what about the Brazil? Obviously, corn did not manage to gain for very long, but what about as Brazil started to harvest?
When we look at the 68% good to excellent rating in corn against 73 expected or 72 5-year average, we could have expected to see the market rally because it's a slow, or I should say a low good to excellent first rating compared to what was anticipated.
Right.
But that rally was short-lived because we saw something very peculiar in July. The July contract in corn in the US dropped quite significantly yesterday. So we questioned the market and also our US analyst. And the answer seems to be that simply there is a switch on the physical side from US origin import to Brazilian origin due to the fact simply that Brazil is starting to harvest.
So in conclusion, would you say that despite some fundamental news, specs are likely to keep selling during price rallies?
It seems to be the case so far, and in a very apparent way, the specs are having their way. They continue to tell us that they will sell rallies, but there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of the bulls will try to put something under the magnifying glass. They've tried with the US, they've tried with Europe, they've tried with China. There might be something else that they might try to tell us about. And there's also all the other elements that we've started the conversation with, which is will there be more Trump tariff tantrums? Will there be a currency reversal? Or is Russia-Ukraine going to be a headline focus?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bertrand, and thank you for watching. For more financial content like this, please like and subscribe to our channel.